Welcome to 10-Minute Astrology. This is episode 4. This episode begins a mini-section within this series where we'll discuss each planet's meaning in detail one at a time. In this episode, we'll focus solely on the Sun. Each planet and sign have a symbol that represents them, called a glyph. The Sun's glyph is a circle with a dot in the center. The glyphs are useful to know to help you identify the location of the planets and signs quickly in a chart. The astrological meaning of the Sun can be understood through our observation of its role in our solar system. For one thing, all the planets in the solar system orbit the Sun. Likewise, the Sun astrologically serves as a sort of center of gravity for us. It represents the broad strokes of the self, the fundamentals of who we are. While we have other planets that represent very different things, the sign, house, and aspects that involve the Sun in our natal charts describe where our center lies. When we don't feel like ourselves, we use phrases like, "I'm just a little off today." Well, off of what? Off of our center, the foundation that we return to every time we need to get clear and have a sense of grounded sanity in who we are. Another observation we can make is that the Sun gives off heat, and while it gives off too much heat to, say, Mercury and Venus to sustain our way of life, and too little heat to Mars and the planets beyond, for Earth it gives just the right amount of heat and light to let our way of life blossom and grow. Likewise, our relationship and the balance with our astrological Sun in our own life helps to build a life that can feed and can be fed by our solar identity. So what makes a healthy Sun? What does that look like? To have a healthy Sun is to have a healthy sense of self. We all have certain characteristics and activities that we do to reinforce our sense of who we are and express ourselves. And the sign and house in which the Sun falls in our natal chart can tell us what sorts of things we need to do to reinforce our sense of identity so that we can build a healthy ego. Now, I use the word ego here not to indicate somebody who lacks humility, but ego in the sense that self-development and self-focused are not dirty words. There's a difference between being self-centered and centering on the self, between being selfish and taking care of your own needs. To have a healthy Sun, we take clues from the sign, house, and other planetary connections known as aspects in your natal chart. These don't describe simply who you are. They're tools and suggested methods that actually help you build a sense of identity in a way that's sustainable. For instance, let's take somebody who has their Sun in the sign of Cancer. We'll learn a lot about Cancer and all its many qualities in detail later, but suffice to say here that this person identifies and needs to identify with a gentle and caregiving kind of energy. Regardless of what else they do or what their other needs are, they must find a way to express their desire to nurture others. It's simply a part of them. It's just who they are. Now, if this person's Sun in the sign of Cancer also falls in the 6th house, the house of work. Again, we'll learn more about the 6th house in detail later. They'll benefit from using their instinct to nurture others as part of the work they do. So, they might be best suited and most interested in professions where that's a big part of the job, such as healthcare professions or caring for children, such as in a daycare, or elderly, such as in a nursing home. They would be a person who not only needs to identify with the energy of the healer, but also will reinforce that identity if they use that skill in their work, as opposed to just a hobby or a communication style, because the 6th house represents our working life. Now, going back to our example of the Sun's relationship to Earth, if the Sun were to become a red giant, it would start increasing in size, swallowing Mercury and Venus, and getting too close to the Earth with an overpowering energy. Figuratively, if your Sun becomes a red giant, then we are talking about ego in the sense of a lack of humility, or a tendency to overpower others with one's own needs and desires, dominating those around you. Even if your style is more passive or demure rather than aggressive and outspoken, this is possible. It's essentially focusing too much on your personal orientation to the world without a kind of balance between your own perception and others around you. This is often a reaction to not feeding yourself enough, which prompts a feeling of overcompensation. It is your job to get your needs met, including the need for acknowledgement that we all have. Sometimes we can get acknowledgement and this sense of appreciation from others, like telling a joke and getting people to laugh, or getting recognized on the job. But most of the time, it's going to need to be us that gives ourselves the recognition and the acknowledgement that we need. If we seek that acknowledgement too much outside of ourselves, another unhealthy sun pattern emerges. This example would be the metaphor of a white dwarf. When you're not feeding your sun, that is, not doing the behaviors that help you keep a sense of your center and your sanity, you're undernourishing your sense of self. And that can lead to an identity crisis. Not knowing who you are because you're not doing the behaviors that reinforce who you are. Or you're allowing other people's egos to overpower your own. Or their lack of acknowledgement to overpower your own needs to self-acknowledge. Becoming too focused on the sense of self or not enough on the sense of self can lead to an unhealthy sun. So essentially, our sun is like our power source. When it's being fed, it can keep everything else running. Even those of us who love our caves or the smell of the rain can't help but feel energized when the sun comes out after a long period of gray weather and dark days. Let's have another example of what unhealthy sun behaviors might look like. The sign, house, and planetary connections to the sun in your natal chart can give clues there as well, just like they can tell us how to live a healthy life and have a healthy sun. So let's take that example that we just discussed, Cancer Sun in the 6th house, and see what might drain this person's energy rather than sustain it. Again, we'll learn more about Cancer in the 6th house in depth soon, but the Cancer energy, due to its desire to nurture, might find themselves giving too much of themselves without getting enough in return. If they allow their kindness to be exploited, perhaps because to speak up about it would make them feel vulnerable or too exposed, they can end up feeling resentful. Taking care of others is certainly part of their nature, but obviously taking care of the self has to find its rightful place in one's life as well. So it can drain that person to be taken advantage of, but not to truly be appreciated or seen for what they're giving. Now this might happen at a job for this person, because the 6th house rules, among other things, how we work and our working environment. Or they may simply take the idea of it being their job to care for others too far, turning themselves effectively into a slave. To summarize, the sun in our charts represents the basic self, how we build a sense of our own identity and strengthen ourselves with a healthy dose of ego. The sign, house, and planetary connections to the sun help us know what kinds of activities will help us have a healthy center of gravity, as well as help us know what warning signs we want to watch out for on the road of life. That does it for this episode of 10-Minute Astrology. Watch for episode 5 soon when we'll discuss the moon. Till then, keep looking up.